Hello and welcome to the Poetic Turn. I'm Darren Stevens with
Evan Carlson.
And we talk about poetry, poets, poems. And today we're taking a deep dive into a poem we've talked about before, Shakespeare's Sonnet 29. And it just really seems to point the poetic turn, Evan.
Yes, indeed. And, we had on Mark Yakic. We talked with him, and he says that Shakespeare is the most underrated poet in the English language. And so we'll maybe see what he means by that a little bit.
We might reject him utterly, Evan. We might decide at the end of this podcast that, we don't need to ever deal with Shakespeare again. We don't need to read him. If we're cast in a Shakespearean play, we'll turn it down.
Well, I used to think that he was the most overrated in the English language. I used to hate Shakespeare.
Why on earth?
Well, I was in high school. I didn't want to read Hamlet. It seemed that everybody thought that you were supposed to read this and that it was good for you, but I just didn't see the appeal to it. But then one day I watched Ian McKellen and Richard III, and suddenly, with someone like that speaking the language, everything clicked for me, and then I loved him.
Yeah. Well, if you connect to it, and I'm very familiar with Shakespeare. I've seen many Shakespeare plays in performance, and I've performed in a few myself. And when I saw Merry Wives of Windsor, I think you saw it as well at Chicago Shakes recently, and you sit in that audience, and it takes everybody's brain a few minutes to kind of acclimate to the language.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I forget the name of the director, but he just did Romeo and Juliet on Broadway with some famous folks in it. And his thing is he likes to start his plays that he directs in the dark because he wants people to just be able to hear the language and get that acclimation happening as quickly as possible without having to be distracted by anything. And so there is something to that.
That's an interesting take on that. Yeah. I think especially maybe if you have not a lot of money for sets and costumes, you could do your whole entire play in the dark and save everybody a lot of time and money.
Well, that's what we do here on the Poetic Turn. It's a dark, improvised play. But today we're going to be thinking about Shakespeare less as a playwright and more of a poet. There's some people who think that he was primarily a poet, and I don't know that I totally agree with that because, they say that he just did the plays to make some money and it was just a side gig, but he thought that his poetry was really what mattered. But I feel like you can't write something like Hamlet as a side project.
No.
I think that he probably was both.
Yeah, I'm sure he was making a living and paying the bills, but you can't have his voluminous show of artistry without caring about language and poetry. And there's so much poetry in the plays, and they move from prose to poetry, but there's clear poetry in the sonnets, Evan.
Yes, indeed.
And we've talked about this one before.
We have with Mike Tooney, because it's just got a great turn.
Yeah, a great turn, a great poetic turn, sometimes called a volta. And shall I assail it first?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, here we go. This is Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
It's just a great poem in general, but that was a great reading.
And it's more accessible than some other of Shakespeare's sonnets and works. We just see that clear shift. He's just so upset or just depressed with the world and his state, his being, and then his thoughts about his loves just turn it around. There's a volta interest instantly. He's in a different place.
Yeah, and one of those words that you can look for if you're looking for a turn is the word yet.
Yet, but, yeah, those words.
Yeah, and so it's yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee. And so it sort of gives you a clue that there is about to be some motion happening.
Yeah, yeah.
That what was first said is not the end-all, be-all.
Yeah. Well, he goes into detail in those 8 lines. He just really casts himself down, down, down. We wallow in that depression for those lines, and it isn't until he's just really so down that he thinks about this one amazing, lovely thing in his life. And haply I happen to, I haply I think on thee.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who hasn't looked around at other people and thought, if I was just like that person or this person, if I had that man's art, that man's scope.
And it's in pop music, too. I wish that I had Jesse's girl. Why can't I have a woman like that, like Jesse's girl? Yeah. I'm sure that's what Rick Springfield was thinking when he was singing that song.
Well, yes. Well, it's in the long tradition of people wanting something more. But what's beautiful in this poem is that luckily the speaker actually does have something more. And he's got this love that reminds him that he wouldn't actually want to be anybody else.
Yes. He would scorn to change his state with kings. He wouldn't be a king. He wouldn't be anybody else but who he is, in love with his lady love.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wonder, because you read it first, how does it feel to read Shakespeare out loud? Because I think that's one of the things that I love about Shakespeare, that you get to taste it differently almost. How does that feel?
It feels good. I think this one is I think it's a little easier. I think this is easier Shakespeare to connect with and read. And so there is some Shakespeare that takes more work to get into, to connect with. Some of the words, some of the archaic language is more troubling. This one is seems to me so accessible that it's a little easier to read and share. But it's fun to read this stuff. It's fun to read this beautiful language.
Yeah. Well, this poem in particular, I haven't fully memorized it, but for a while I had it written up and posted it at my work. So when I was bagging food up at the restaurant I work at, I could sort of be trying to learn this sonnet. And committing to memory a poem is something that can be fairly enjoyable. But I didn't quite get through the whole thing for some reason.
I need to work on it. It wouldn't take me much time to get it memorized. The one poem I have memorized is Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll.
Really?
Yes, and I use that to test microphones and to see what my sound is like and to make sure I'm at a good gain. It was brilliant the slightly toasted garden of the way bomb to the bar goes the morass of gravy where the Jabberwock my son the jaws by the claws of catch. And so I'm so used to using that. This would be a more elevated poem, perhaps, to memorize and use.
Well, and it's the kind of thing that you can pull out in your life, whether to other people, to it's very romantic. You could I remember I think I taught this poem back in when I was a substitute teacher for as a long-term English sub, and people sort of liked that. It's sort of like this love note. This you could read it to someone you're interested in, and it's also just so fun to say the words. The way he puts words together is just enjoyable to utter.
Yes.
I mean that first line. It's one of those timeless lines in English literature.
Yeah. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone. I'm not just miserable, I'm all by myself. I all alone beweep my outcast state.
Yeah.
And then he shakes his fist at the heavens and troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries.
Yeah, and that's I haven't dug into this, but deaf heaven, that's maybe a bigger statement
Yeah.
in his day than ours. I mean, religion and the religious institutions were much more powerful back then.
Yeah, yeah. And so if heaven is not listening to you, if you're not getting through, if your prayers aren't answered, that's a
And to say
serious
that,
thing. Yeah.
that,
And
that it's deaf heaven.
yeah, to say that out loud. Yeah, yeah.
My bootless cries. I mean, and then it almost comes out of nowhere, this turn, that and that's sort of how our minds work. I think is that just in the midst of something, you see a sparkle and then it grows.
Yeah, he just happens to think about his love.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
His love, their love, whatever.
I know. Well, that's the other thing is that these sonnets, much has been thought about them, and some people think they're very autobiographical. But when you read a poem, you don't really have to place any of the author into it necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why some people say speaker. That way, that it's not really William Shakespeare, but it is a little bit.
Yeah.
But we can't say that this actually happened. It could be that he was so lonely and wrote this as a fantasy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If I had a love like that
Yeah.
I could think on. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then I scorn to change my state with kings. Then it gets, I mean, that gets a little bit political too, to say that he's actually has something that a king could never dream of.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. Well, let's hear your version of it, Evan. Let's hear you read it, and
Sure thing.
yeah.
Yeah, this is Sonnet 29. When, in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me, like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
Yes. I think that time through, I heard the real anger in the beginning part of it, just like he's just so disgusted with himself and
Yeah.
where he is in life, and I heard more of that disgust in your reading of that, especially the first part there. Yeah.
Well, and for me, the word that really stuck out was remembered, because for some reason in my head, I always picture this as like they're together or something, but really, it's just remembered love.
Yeah.
She could be far, or whoever could be far away, and they might not have even seen each other in forever.
Yeah. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings.
Yeah.
The wealth of enjoyment. I feel rich in friends, rich in my connection to this person. Yeah.
Now I wonder, does the love feel better remembered or in person? I wonder if it's the kind of thing that when you don't have it right there, it's better than when it's there.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah,
that's
I don't know.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because he or they could just go to their person, but no, they're remembering.
Yeah. Well, they say distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so perhaps that's what brings about poems like these.
Yeah. You can't just pick up the phone. in Elizabethan England and call your person. So you just have to remember and see them when you see them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I go back to that first line, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. So this is somebody who people are looking at him with disgrace, disdain for him. And so it isn't just that he's down on his luck, but perhaps he's done something that has made people really hate him.
I don't know about that. I think when in disgrace with fortune is just the state of things, the world you find yourself in, the place you find yourself in, and men's eyes. And also, is it his opinion of men's eyes, other people's look at him, or is it the way things really are? It seems to me
because he's reading into a lot of things here. Yeah. And that's sort of what gets people in positions like this is that you don't actually know what other people think or what's going on in other people, but you start thinking that everybody else has it better.
Yeah. The grass is greener over there.
Yeah. And that you're the only one that heaven will not answer.
That's right. Everybody else, they trouble heaven and they get an answer. Their prayers are answered.
Yeah.
They're really not, of course. And look upon myself, turning inward, and curse my fate. And it's all in his head. It seems we're in his head in this poem. We don't really know what his fortune is, what his state is. We don't know what people think of him really. It's in his head that we are dwelling here.
Well, that's where the turn really kind of emphasizes that intense swinging back and forth between extreme emotions.
In that line, yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising.
Yeah, and so I imagine that there is this intense volley back and forth of remembering and not remembering, and so there is a lot of motion here.
Yeah.
Well, is Shakespeare overrated or underrated?
Well, he's certainly highly rated.
He's highly rated.
I think. Do we love every Shakespeare play equally?
No.
No. Do we love every sonnet equally? I mean, this is way up there for me. I think for you as well.
Oh yeah.
But like any poet, even the poets we've talked to, I think there are some poems they've written that they feel more strongly about or feel more positively about, and some they're not as happy with, or some they even make changes on later.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, I forget the exact information about this, but I believe the sonnets were published without his permission. And so it was somebody else who published them. There was different copyright laws back then, and so the ordering, well, it could have been him, it could have been somebody else.
Yeah, was this 29 or 17 or 64?
But it feels like a good 29.
It feels like a 29 to me too, Evan. Very good.
A 29.
Yeah. Maybe a 29-year-old would have these kinds of thoughts.
Yeah, because it's just old enough to have really not done everything they want to.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to The Poetic Turn. We're just talking about the podcast is called The Poetic Turn, and this poem so clearly gives an indication of what a poetic turn is. And so when you're reading other poems, when you're looking at poetry, look for that turn. And Evan, would you say that if a poem does not have a turn, it's maybe it can be disappointing?
It can be disappointing. I mean, imagine if we read this poem and it just kept going.
If it was just all him being depressed.
And that man's scope with what I most enjoy contented least. And my hair sucks. And my, and I look terrible. And everything is terrible. That.
And it didn't turn.
Then it's just like, well, I don't think I needed to be the one who read this. I'm not a mental health professional.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
the turn is what makes it art, what makes it beautiful, what teaches us something, whether literally or figuratively. I mean, it if you read a poem and you really hate it, well, when I read a poem and I really hate it, first I say, you know what, I'm going to look and see if there is some movement here, if there is a turn, if there is surprise. And if I find it, usually I start liking the poem more and not hating it. If I don't find it, usually I think, maybe it's just a bad poem.
It's just
Maybe
a bad poem. There are bad poems. We make no mistake. Yeah,
Shakespeare wrote some.
Yeah.
wrote some, but he also wrote some incredible ones.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you again for listening to The Poetic Turn. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, do all that stuff. Tell your friends, your poetry-loving friends, or people you think might be receptive to a podcast about poetry. So that's Sonnet 29. We picked on that particular Shakespearean sonnet. It has such a wonderful turn, or volta. This podcast is called The Poetic Turn, so we wanted to spend a little time today really discussing a poem that really has that strong, strong turn. And I thank you so much, as always, Evan, for co-hosting The Poetic Turn with me.
Thank you, Darren. This was a pleasure.
Bye-bye, everybody.